When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Breathe deep. Imagine your legs more limber in Duluth Trading Double Flex Denim. Envision euphorically squatting for that can of suds, bending for your toolbox in a state of bliss, lunging for your laser level on a whole new level. Relax and allow the flex to fill you with ability. Find your inner flex in Double Flex Denim only at Duluth Trading.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
Hello, mega orderers. We are going to pop in to a conversation that I had on the Keen On podcast with my friend Andrew Keen. It's entitled Trump's Hot Summer of Disorder: How Short-Term Chaos is America's Long-Term Global Strategy. Andrew focuses on things like tech, the changing economy, how neoliberalism and private capital is making government irrelevant in the big issues of our day. He and I have quite a little debate. I see a role for government, and he sees a role for the private sector. So it's a mad, 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 mad world out there, and I hope you enjoy it as we get to the episode.
Hello, Jason. Lovely to see you back.
Great to see you.
Yeah, well, I've set you up, Jason. Total disorder. Is it a particularly disordered week, or is this just one more week in the new age of global disorder?
I wish I could say that this was somehow abnormal, but it's just one more week in the age of global disorder. We have these different tracks, the geopolitical track with Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia. We have the climate change track. We have AI and tech, and then the tariffs and the bizarre blowback and how all these things are interacting with each other and reshaping the global economy and global geopolitics without any adults in the room shepherding that transformation. That's what disorder is.
Well, there are adults in the room, although we may not like them. Donald Trump. Is this increasingly becoming Trump's world? I mean, you and I are no great fans of Trump. I don't suppose most of our audience are either. But is he getting what he wants? He's never been shy to celebrate the kind of disorder that concerns you so much.
Yeah, I think that those pundits like you and I who are on the center left but like to call a spade need to admit where Trump has actually succeeded in doing what he wants. Because there is a thing where people love to say, oh, he failed. Oh, his dropping the bunker buster bomb on Iran was a failure. It didn't deter them. But the answer is no, it's not a failure. It did bring the Israeli-Iran 12-day war to an end. It probably saved human lives in Iran if the Israeli campaign had continued. And when it comes to global trade, Trump managed, despite the chaos of announcing tariffs, then having a 90-day pause, then putting them on Canada, then taking them off Canada. He now has his tariffs on, and he's had the EU, Japan, South Korea, and now India beat a path to the White House to negotiate terms which are actually favorable to the U.S. I don't want to live in this new world with tariffs. But Trump has largely achieved his aims, not in a coherent way, but you might say that the chaos was a feature for him. So we are in a position as commentators to have to say, yes, Trump has gotten his way on many domains.
Is that because some people might argue because anyone who runs the US government can do it because of American military and political and above all, perhaps economic power? Or is it because he has his own bizarre kind of talent for disorder?
It's both, but you're exactly right. We always knew that the US had tremendous economic, political, and military leverage, but no one ever tried to use it so ruthlessly and haphazardly. And Trump does both. And it turns out that the American economy, although only about 1.8 times as large as Europe's, has 5-6 times the global leverage. So he's able to wield that. And then when it comes to tech, Europe doesn't have a major trillion-dollar tech company the way that the US has 3 to 5 of them, depending on how you count. And therefore, that gives tremendous leverage. And Trump also is willing to push buttons and threaten to not give aid to Ukraine, threaten to not do intelligence sharing. And maybe by the time this airs on my podcast on Thursday, the 14th
this is going out. But just to be clear, this is going out today on Keen on America, August the 8th. And I think it'll go out next Thursday on the 14th on Jason's Disordered podcast.
Exactly. And what I was going to say is that by the time it goes out on Disorder and you, the mega orderers, are listening to this, it's possible that Trump will have had a one-to-one with Putin, which has been announced. And that one-to-one, although I wouldn't counsel it, is very much what Trump wants, because it's cutting the Europeans and NATO out of high-level bilateral symmetry. So he is both disordering and he's achieving his agenda, whereby he's the swing player that says some things that are favorable to Mark Rutte and NATO at the NATO summit, and then to Zelensky at another time. Then he humiliates Zelensky in the Oval Office. And he has made himself this swing player and mega disorderer in chief on the international scene.
Janan Ganesh, a counterintuitive writer on the FT, wrote an interesting piece, one of his op-eds earlier this week, talking about what he calls the high summer of Donald Trump. Is Trump having a good summer, Jason?
Well, I think domestically he's doing very poorly, because the Epstein conspiracy is not going to go away, and his attempt to distract from it and his very paradoxical statements make him look more guilty and culpable, and that he's covering up something, than if he said nothing at all. So domestically, he's being hurt by Epstein. He's being hurt by attacking Jerome Powell and raising inflation expectations. But internationally, he's achieved a lot. Again, I don't like to say that Trump did something good, but when we go back to the bunker buster and we go back to ending the Iran-Israel 12-day war, you have to say chapeau. He achieved something there. He's also turning against Netanyahu in some ways and criticizing him. And it may be that he will finally push Bibi to scale back in Gaza and to let more humanitarian aid in and to change Israeli military plans. So he is doing stuff internationally also on tariffs that I didn't think he was going to be able to achieve. So this might be the high watermark of, American hyperpower in terms of Trump's irrational ability to assert his will on a lot of things geopolitically, while his approval ratings in the US at their lowest ever, because he's managed to piss off a lot of MAGA Republicans. And that's an interesting paradox, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that often this stuff is grasping at straws by progressives and liberals, because they're never going to vote against him. So I'm not convinced that he's doing badly on the domestic front. I mean,
one second. Marjorie Taylor Greene says that Gaza is a genocide, and other MAGA people say, show us the Epstein list. It's not clear that pissing those people off while also turning Elon against him isn't going to be seeding quite a headache for him in the 2026 midterms.
We will see. One of the things that strikes me talking to you about this, Jason, is we have such remarkably short, you don't, I hope I don't, but most, certainly Trump and this world has such short memories. I mean, we've forgotten about Iran. I didn't even bring it up in any of the headlines. We haven't forgotten about Ukraine, but it seems to be always the second or third story. We didn't lead with any stories about Ukraine or Putin. Has Trump successfully imposed, shall we say, his own ontological version of the world, where every day is a new story, a new crisis? It's a social media, reality television, episodic ontology, where something seems really important, like the bombing of Iran one day, and then the next day it's entirely forgotten and replaced by something else.
Yes, I think that nails a key feature of our disordered world that Trump grasped in 2016 and that he has perfected more than any other politician, which is that if you own a 24-hour news cycle, you can constantly set the agenda, where one day the agenda is about drug cartels. And then the next day it's about deporting illegal aliens and immigrants. But then the next day it's about this great foreign policy success and I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. And when he doesn't get the Nobel Peace Prize and the foreign policy success never materialized, all of a sudden the agenda is on something else. And it's that ability to captivate not just his base, but the global public media, including the BBC and Le Monde and maybe even Russian media, to the thing that he wants them to be talking about, which is genius. And I think that this allows the real issues to fall through the cracks. I'm a keen listener, pun intended, to Keen on America. And I like how you have a sustained focus on how tech and AI are reshaping the big issues in our world. And of course, if you just listen to the media, those issues don't break through. So I want to ask you, with the way that AI is progressing by leaps and bounds, what do you think that mainstream media, as well as you and I, should cover about how this historical moment is being missed in terms of focusing on the regulation of the new economy and the new brave new world of AI that we're entering into?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jason, for such a generous compliment. I actually don't agree with you in the sense that, I mean, we live in an age of general hysteria and paranoia, of course, which is both caused and a consequence of Trump and MAGA and the other craziness in the world. But I think that more and more people are recognizing why AI is so important. I mean, there are two or three areas here. On the one hand, there's the economic area. I know you enjoyed a show I did last week, my weekly tech roundup with my old friend Keith Tier, who argued last Saturday, that OpenAI would be worth $10 trillion. And I kind of laughed at him. But this week,
I also think you need to put that in perspective for people. The point is that that's pretty much larger than the economies of France, Italy, and Germany put together. In other words, that's to contextualize that.
Right. That's, I mean, 10 trillion is an awful lot of money. And if he also suggested that Anthropic, the second player, the kind of the Hertz to the Avis or the Avis to the Hertz in AI would be worth 5 trillion. So we're talking about a $15 trillion valuation for these two leading AI companies. So I kind of laughed at him, thought, are you mad? And in fact, the headline was, has Silicon Valley finally gone totally bonkers? But this week, the news is that OpenAI is actually, and this is a private company that still isn't profitable, so it's still in some ways just a classic Silicon Valley startup. Their next round, they're raising money at a valuation of $500 billion. So they're already 10% of the way, or certainly they're 5% of the way to their $10 trillion valuation. And they still don't really have a coherent, we're not entirely sure what their business model is. So this is not just fancy. So on the one hand, the economics of this are real. I mean, we're talking about maybe not trillions, but certainly billions of dollars being poured into this industry. We're seeing the way in which it's changing the nature of work. I was with my son this previous weekend in New York, and he's not a big AI fan, but he told me a lot of his friends are increasingly 20-something friends, NYU graduates, are increasingly obsessed with building relationships with their AI, getting advice on everything from career to their love lives, and it's changing everything. So I think that AI is profound, but where I would disagree with you is I think people recognize this. There are more and more books. In fact, there are too many books on the dangers of AI. So I don't think that this is being ignored, but it is for real. That's
in
for
our
sure.
global policy agenda, though, Andrew. Yes, the commentariat and young people understand that AI is going to change everything from how they work to what they masturbate to. It's going to change everything. But what isn't happening is a coordinated policy between the US and our allies in Europe, or between China.
I got to jump in here, Jason. I'm not sure we allow the word masturbation on Keen on America. Do you allow it on Disorder?
All words are allowed on Disorder.
I'm teasing you. You slipped that one in to be even cruder. But yeah, go on.
The question is the coordination. My thesis of the enduring disorder is not that people are missing AI or climate change as issues. They know they're issues. They know that in 2050, our kids are going to be living in the world that climate change and AI hath wrought. The thing is that as Trump is busy throwing his weight around and reshaping the global economy vis-a-vis tariffs and intervening in Iran and whatever, he's not shaping how AI is going to play out. That's busy happening between some investors in New York and Silicon Valley and how the Chinese are competing with it. There is no new kind of international diplomacy in that space. And that makes me think that we're like in a 2 or 3 tracked world where what's happening at number 10 and in the White House and in Brussels isn't even bearing upon these most important issues that are being dealt with in boardrooms in San Francisco and Manhattan, right? There's just no connection there.
Again, I'm not sure I completely agree with you. I think that Trump has been very influenced by Silicon Valley investors, entrepreneurs, thinkers. I mean, he was obviously close to Musk. Now he's much closer to Sam Altman. Sam Altman has benefited from the bust up between Musk and Trump. And I think that Trump has put his muscle, if that's the right word, or certainly his theatrical muscle behind the idea of America as an AI superpower. And I think that may explain, for example, the headline today about the Intel CEO. Of course, Intel make computer chips. They're not quite in the NVIDIA league, but they're extremely important. So what we're seeing actually in structural terms is, if not order, certainly some logic to America as a global AI superpower, competing with the Chinese, not allowing access to their chips, and this new titanic economic, intellectual, political battle between American AI companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and the Chinese model. So I think that makes, there is some, I wouldn't say it's order, but there's some logic to that. That's where that's where this new Cold War, that's certainly the economic focus of it. And I think that Trump rather likes the idea of America as an AI superpower.
I agree with everything you said there. He does like the idea of America as an AI superpower, and he loves the idea of a race, us versus China. But what he doesn't get is to use the federal government to regulate the domain and itself participate. He's just outsourced it to the private sector. It's really important to put in here that DARPA essentially invented the internet. It was DOD's desire for computer chips for missiles in Vietnam, which launched the computer chip industry. It was going to space, which invented so many things that were critical for TV and early computing. He's not using the federal government to shape the industry. He's just deregulating and saying, I want to have a nationalistic competition between deregulated American industry and then nationalized semi-sovereign Chinese companies. And there's no coordination between what government can do and the force multiplier that government can be and the private sector. That's just seeded the ground. And to me, that's disorder, because there's no coordination between the nodes of the American government and private companies, or between the American government and our allies. How are we leveraging the potential of, EU governments and Dutch expertise to link into American know-how? We're not. We're letting the private sector do the whole thing. And that, to me, is disorder. And after the break, we're back with Andrew Keen on Keen On.
Dealing with hidradenitis suppurativa, HS, is tough. But you're not alone. Before I started Cosentyx, I looked at the website and saw it had many years of clinical research. That made me feel confident.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe hidradenitis suppurativa, HS. Don't use if allergic to Cosentyx. Get checked for TB before starting. Increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like TB or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if IBD symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Don't wait. Ask your dermatologist about Cosentyx.
BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an gestural implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
This is History's Heroes. People with purpose, brave ideas, and the courage to stand alone, including a pioneering surgeon who rebuilt the shattered faces of soldiers in the First World War.
He would look at these men and he would say, "Don't worry, Sonny, you'll have as good a face as any of us when I'm done with you."
Join me, Alex von Tunzelmann, for History's Heroes. Subscribe to History's Heroes wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, you're talking to me from Europe. You're an American in Europe. I'm a European in America, and it's the American model that works, Jason. You know this as well as I do. The Europeans are irrelevant in this. The Chinese and the Americans dominate. Europe has failed on every front to develop its own AI infrastructure, startup companies, and the only one that has any relevance was acquired by Google. DeepMind, of course, which is based in London. The reality of AI, but let me finish. The reality of AI, for better or worse, I don't necessarily celebrate this, is it doesn't need government. These companies are more powerful than the government itself. Just as Trump, for a moment at least, unleashed Musk on the US federal government and fired all these people and made it even more dysfunctional. It wasn't particularly functional in the first place. So these multi-trillion-dollar companies are radically revolutionizing everything from education to the military. So I take your point on DARPA, but that was almost a century ago. And of course, the only reason the internet became the disruptive phenomenon that it was when the government enabled the internet to become commercial, which triggered the first internet boom of the 1990s. So for better or worse, we live in a 21st century age where the state is becoming secondary to private companies. And private companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Amazon, Apple, are more powerful. And that's in my view, the odd relationship between Trump and, say, a company like Apple. He imagines he's pushing them around. My guess is Tim Cook is he's certainly much smarter than Trump. And actually, ultimately, it'll be Apple pushing Trump around, because companies like Apple, which are worth several $1 trillion, or Nvidia or Microsoft, I think they're both worth about $4 or $5 trillion companies, are way more powerful than the government itself. So that's the new reality. Maybe it's a disordered reality, but it's one we have to accept.
It is a disordered reality, Andrew, and I agree with everything that you've said. I'd just like to bring another framing. You and I never shy away from a good debate. And of course, the private sector has capacities that the federal government lacks and will never have, both in terms of innovation and in terms of the ability to raise and allocate capital and recruit talent. But there is a new geopolitical chessboard that's going to emerge over electricity resources, access to power. You had a great episode. I think
this guy, Draw Poleg, AI, it was from July the 25th. AI is too busy to take your job. This guy, Draw Poleg, he's an Israeli based in New York. He's really smart. And his thesis is that is on the what I call the electrifying truth of our algorithmic future.
Yeah. What I want to draw from what Dror said is that for AI companies to succeed, they need infrastructure. And they need infrastructure that is not yet built and that is going to need to be adapted for their national champions. And this is something that I believe we need a NATO for. We need an international body brought into being by a treaty that links together allies who will do things like create electricity and have new standards for nuclear energy and solar and other things, and will regulate how AI information is stored. So, for example, I'm creating an AI product for my consultancy, Andrew, and before I go and I try to sell it to anyone, whether it's an oil company or a Western government or a construction company, they want to know, where is the data stored? And can you make sure that no Chinese firms or Russian firms are learning from the data that you feed into your AI? That's because people care at the point of use and procurement how the thing is headquartered and how the models learn from what you put onto them. So we need regulation and blocks, just like the Cold War had NATO and the Warsaw Pact. We need a political structure which is going to govern the us of AI, let's say the democracies, plus maybe our allies in the Gulf who we need for cheap energy, against the them of AI, who will be, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And I think that you can't say that government is going to be irrelevant, because government is going to provide the backbone and the structures on which the real decisions which will allow what kind of AI future we're going to have is going to be written.
Yeah, I disagree in a couple of ways. Firstly, you talk about a NATO for AI. I think you're going to talk about a Marshall Plan. Marshall plans are always, it's a word people use when they have no idea how to figure things out. I mean, going back to NATO or the Cold War is, in my view, not particularly advisable. I mean, we're talking, I think, on the 60th or the 100th anniversary of the dropping of the second nuclear bomb on Nagasaki. So there's no celebration then. We shouldn't be looking back at the Cold War and thinking, now that was an ideal world. It was an ordered world where you had two blocks. It was also a world of enormous suffering, of regional wars, of horrible cruelty, much worse than I think our own age. So I don't think we want to idealize the Cold War as some sort of ideal order. But
I'm not idealizing it. I'm extrapolating the lessons that are needed to get allied countries on board for a shared mission. And in my mind, that shared mission is, one, to constrain AI so that the artificial general intelligence, the AGI, doesn't essentially come to rule the universe and subordinate humans, or B, that our adversaries or terrorists or non-state groups don't come to use the AI that we've created against our sovereign interests.
Yeah, but the we is so foggy. It's who exactly we are. Talking about constraining AI. some of these companies, I mean, OpenAI, Sam Altman claims to be responsible. I'm not sure he really is, but Anthropic is a little more responsible. But the reality of this age, again, I'm not necessarily, Jason, celebrating, but the reality is these companies are more powerful than government. Government can't constrain them. So the only way we're going to be able to constrain AI is through these companies. European governments have become more and more marginalized because their only expertise is in saying no to American or probably Chinese technologies, which make them more and more marginalized in the world economy. Let me finish. When it comes to the military stuff, we have companies like Palantir, which are essentially colonizing the old military industrial state, Eisenhower state. Now it's become the Silicon Valley industrial state. So we just have to come to terms. There is no Marshall Plan. There is no NATO. The reality of the 21st century, particularly when it comes to AI, are these dominant private companies, multi-trillion-dollar companies, where government becomes more and more marginalized. It's possible, I guess, if there's some terrible event, a war, an invasion from overseas, an environmental catastrophe. But at the moment, government is secondary.
I'm not sure government is completely secondary because it provides the electricity infrastructure and legal infrastructure on which these platforms sit. It's a classical Adam Smith public good issue. The thing has to cross the roads and bridges to get to the consumer. And in this case, the roads and bridges are the electricity and the fiber optic cables and the IP protection.
When were you last? I mean, you're living in North London. When were you last in America? I mean, America is increasingly becoming a place that the sort of the libertarian wet dream of which for many of us is actually the nightmare of everything becomes privatized. So if not the roads, infrastructure has been so privatized that that government is more and more marginalized. I mean, there's a huge debate, as you know, in the US with Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson on abundance and why progressives can't build or rebuild or bring change. The reality is it's harder and harder. And the only change that's coming is from private companies. Let me be clear. I'm not celebrating. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but this is the American model. This is why America is so strong. This is why, and this is a feature of our Trumpian age. He's playing off it and he's compounding it.
You and I are reading the map the same. We both see the underlying conditions. I want to expand on what Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson write in Abundance, which is that government working, whether it's through public-private partnerships or working with national champions, and those national champions will be firms like Palantir and OpenAI, or potentially Google, or in European cases, ASML, or you mentioned DeepMind.
Well, DeepMind's owned by Google. That's the tragedy of the European model, or the lack of model in Europe.
It can still be a national champion. It can work in a synergistic way. Keir Starmer had a symposium in West London a few months ago where he said, we are going to create 1 million AI-powered jobs in the UK. He's failed on a lot of things, and he's driven a lot of wealth out of the country, and I'm quite disappointed. He doesn't need to fail at that, Andrew. There is every opportunity to leverage the universities at which the UK excels, the English language, the diaspora of the subcontinent and of Eastern Europe, two places where there is a lot of coding knowledge, and London is a focal point to create the jobs of the future and have the British government seed and leverage its power to shape how that comes into being. Government is still going to be very important. And that's why I mentioned Dror Poleg, because who do you think is going to be creating the electricity and governing how the data flows back and what constitutes IP theft? And the answer is government.
It's wishful thinking. I mean, Google now is pioneering the development of nuclear power. And we'll see the reappearance, my guess is, of nuclear. And Draw is really good on the importance of power in this AI revolution, because that's what's essential if we're to get it. It requires enormous amounts of power. But again, it's all privatized. You mentioned Starmer. Starmer and Biden are pinups, or it's the wrong words, the reverse of pinups. They're examples of the old world, of falling back on government that doesn't work. I mean, Starmer is incredibly unpopular in the UK. Biden's presidency was a profound failure, which enabled Trump. The problem with the left, and this is what Klein and Thompson, this is why their book triggered such an interesting, or is triggering such an interesting debate, is that we cannot go back to the old New Deal world that we took for granted. But it's not clear what the alternative is. The alternative is not just traditional government, but progressives don't want the Trumpian alternative of a kind of a Darwinian private system, a Randian world where private companies like OpenAI and Anthropic control government. So what's the third way? And it's still not clear what it is. That's why, in my view, progressives in the left are in such crisis. That reflects why Starmer still looks, to me at least, like a deer in the headlights. He doesn't quite know what to do because he's been brought up on the thesis that you're articulating of government, of traditional government, which no longer works. Plus, there's the issue, of course, of tax and resources, which has stymied and undermined his regime. So for me, he is a symptom. Starmer is a particularly good symptom of the crisis.
Yes, Starmer is a symptom of the crisis, and the traditional left, as well as the center left that he represents, have failed to articulate the new vision. But going back to Thompson and Ezra Klein, it doesn't mean that vision can't be articulated. It's going to be one of public-private partnerships, of a NATO for AI and electricity generation and green energy, whereby government is going to provide not necessarily subsidies, because those don't always work, but incentives and force multiplication to do things like China has done, to seed new industries. The reason the Chinese got there first on solar panels is because government is still very powerful to get stuff done, and when it's working with the private sector. That's how the Chinese can build high-speed rail, thousands and thousands of kilometers of it, when we can't even get from Sacramento to San Francisco. So you can't just say, because we're failing to achieve the potential of government, that we have to live in a libertarian chaos. No, the Chinese, as well as to some extent the Danish, provide a model of things that we can be doing.
Wow. Hold on. Firstly, putting the Chinese and the Danish in the same bucket, I'm sure a lot of Danes now have switched this thing off. We've lost all our Danish listeners, Jason. I always make a joke about the Danes, because we always want to, when we have these kind of debates, we always in the end say, well, why can't we be like the Danes? Because even the Danes aren't like the Danes. But your point about the Chinese is really interesting. You talk about public-private partnerships, which sounds like a McKinsey white paper. There's no private-public partnership in China. China is an authoritarian regime dominated by an incredibly strong autocratic party. We did an interesting show on Xi Jinping this week about his father and his tough upbringing. There is the Chinese model. You're right. That is an alternative, but it's not a public-private partnership. It's also
it has aspects of it, though,
well,
Andrew.
not really. It's a top-down authoritarianism. The reason why China built all that electric rail is because the government determined that was the right thing to do, and they did it. So,
but it's not the government that's directly building it. I will guide the listeners to an episode of Disorder that I did with Zoe Liu on the oversupply in the Chinese economy. The way that it works is things are decided at the Politburo level, and then at the regional level, monies are given to various private firms to build the factory, make the solar panel, build the rail. And there is a private sector that competes. It competes in a corrupt way for patronage from local government, from semi-sovereign banks. But it's not as if someone in Beijing in the Soviet style causes the factory to be built. They do some things that interface between government and a kind of entrepreneurship. And this may cause oversupply in solar panels when a bureaucrat decides we need 2 gazillion solar panels next year, and those subsidies trickle through to the provinces to build them. But there is an interplay between what Deng Xiaoping wanted, which is an unleashed private sector, and centralized Stalinist Politburo style planning. And there's a lot we can learn, because the state of California is an example of a broken system of that interface. And I mentioned Denmark, not that Denmark is a perfect model. There are some things that work better in the Netherlands, for example, whereby government can work with its national champions and private firms to build rail and roads and fiber optic cables cheaper and better than they can be built in California and New Jersey. There are synergies, and there are models of those synergies that are going to be very relevant for the AI economy. And I think we need treaties of like-minded countries that can allow best practices for this to happen.
Yeah, I disagree strongly. I think that we've been falling back on the Danish or the Dutch models. And firstly, I'm not sure they really exist. Secondly, these are tiny, irrelevant countries. And thirdly, it's not possible to impose these kind of models because they're foreign. So what we need, we being the Anglo-American world of progressives, you and I, who want an alternative to Trump, but who recognize the structural crisis of our Starmer-Biden moment. We need some other alternative. I used to talk about Web3, maybe some decentralized logic or way of reorganizing the economy. That seems a little mystical. The other thing that I think is on the horizon, I'm moderately optimistic about AI. I think generally it's a good thing rather than a bad thing, although obviously it's an incredibly complicated and fast-moving development. The one thing that, when it comes to your world of disorder, the one thing that does deeply concern me is crypto. Because I think as Trump profits personally and politically from crypto, ultimately there's going to be a crash. Now, the question is whether that crash will actually impact the broader economy. But what concerns me is as banks now begin to invest in crypto, and as indeed states begin to invest in crypto, and as this corrupt Trumpian regime invests and promotes crypto for their own benefits, I do fear that that is the real crack. That's the moment when we're going to face the truth of what's happening. But we will see. I don't know. I wonder what your take is on crypto. We did a very good show earlier this week with a financial analyst who is a Trump supporter, but was very clear on crypto. He said, there's nothing there. It's a scam. It's just another speculative bubble. No, bringing up the Dutch, no different from the Dutch tulip craze or the South Sea bubble, or the dot-com boom of the 90s. And ultimately it will burst, and ultimately everyone will lose their money. The real question is whether it will actually impact the dollar, gold, and all these other features of the global economy.
Well, I am of two minds about crypto. If everyone believes that Bitcoin, because it's limited and decentralized, is a store of value, it will remain a store of value. But there is no there. It has no intrinsic value, and it can easily burst as much as a tulip bubble. It's a question on what the cultural norms are. But going back to our larger disagreement, I think that you and I both believe in markets, and I don't like being called a progressive because I'm a centrist culturally, and I believe in a strong state, and I'm not about the individual and individual rights. So I'm not a progressive. I think that markets emerge when governments allow a private sector to flourish under rules of the game that they set. And I'm an Adam Smithian in this. You can't have a market if the government doesn't enforce the SEC regulations and doesn't call a scam and prevent insider trading. And therefore, the pure libertarianism of Trump, where it's who you know that allows you to do the insider trading, isn't going to work in the long run. And I want markets to be free and open in our democratic societies to create value. But for them to be free and open, you need government to protect intellectual property, to prevent against insider trading, and to provide the rudiments, the fiber optic cables, the roads, and the education, which are the public goods on which these things rest. My worry about our era of disorder is that governments now are providing 20th century goods, and those goods are irrelevant for the markets of the 21st century. And we haven't moved forward to be able to leverage what the US, UK, and EU can do for this mid-21st century economy.
Yeah, I don't think we're in complete disagreement. What I would say, and this comes back to crypto, and we're going to have to end in a second, Jason, because I know you've got to run, is that crypto might force us to recognize the importance of government. Because if crypto does crash and does create some sort of massive global financial crisis, suddenly people will recognize the value of government. I agree with you on the logical need for government, but we now in the mid-20s, we need an event. I mean, going back 100 years, maybe a Wall Street crash kind of event. We need, and I don't celebrate this kind of event, but we need a catastrophe, or it will be a catastrophe, maybe an environmental one, an economic, a military, but some sort of catastrophe that will force people to recognize why we need government. At the moment, falling back on the Danish or the Dutch model or wanting Starmer or Biden to succeed isn't enough. We need a negative model, shall we say. We need to be awakened from this sort of it's not just libertarianism in Trump, it's a libertarian patrimonialism, which makes it so surreal. But we need to be awakened from that. And it's going to take, Trump is having a good month, but whether he'll have a good year or a good couple of years is another question. That I tend to be pretty pessimistic, and in the long run, there is, I think, an inevitability of a massive crisis, which will force us to reevaluate the role of government. But of course, as Keynes famously said, in the long run, we're all dead, which means that you never quite know when it's going to happen.
And that long run is going to expose that in this enduring disorder, climate change, AI, Ukraine, Gaza, tax havens are all linked. And we've needed government and international agreements to codify how they're allowed to interact. And I'm waiting for that great synthesizer. And I will be happy to chat with you again, Andrew, as that crisis comes into being. And I hope it is not as destabilizing as it might be.
We will see, Jason. Thank you so much for putting up with my interruptions and my aggressive manner of conducting this conversation. You're always a good partner, a good friend, very open-minded. It's always an interesting conversation. As I said, your Disorder podcast for Keen On listeners is essential listening. Anyone who likes Keen On will enjoy Disorder, and I hope vice versa. Wonderful to talk, Jason. We should do this more regularly. We'll talk again in the fall. Keep well, Jason, and keep doing your good work. Thank you so much.
Well done. Talk to you soon, Andrew. Thanks. Bye. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this special collaboration between Disorder and Keen On. Follow the links in the show notes to hear some of the episodes that Andrew has referenced, like with Dror Peleg, about the role of electricity in this new AI age. And to my mind, that means the role that government is going to have to play. As always, please like and subscribe and rate us wherever you're getting this podcast. 5-star reviews really help. And join our Substack for extra content by following the link in the show notes. We'll be back in our regular Disorder format next Tuesday. Hope you have an orderly week.